Hello, friends. I am Chevee. Welcome to my shed. How are you today? How's life in your world? How's things where you are? I hope it's fantastic. I hope everything is great. Everything here is wonderful. And today I want to talk about writing. I think that we've established over the last 4 years that I would like to find a rhythm as a writer and be able to share my writing. And I have tried to write lots of stories and novels and all sorts of stuff that I have not shared with anybody because it's all really, really bad. But I've spent the last 4 years thinking about being a writer. But I was thinking about being a writer, as a teenager. I have evidence of that. I have quite a bit of evidence. If you went to the other side of the basement and looked through some of my totes of like keepsake type stuff, you would find lots of these types of books, of spiral bound books and composition books and pocket books and journals, just full of stuff. And I've been doing that since I was a teen, maybe even a preteen. I'm not 100% sure. But I was going through a purge the other day. We just, there's so much stuff that sometimes I need to go through it and really say, is this something that interests me or makes me happy, or is this something that my progeny will one day reflect on? And I found this particular notebook, labeled number 2. And it has the symbols for the various members of Led Zeppelin. On the back, I did some weird art. I remember doing that a lot. But this particular notebook, I don't know when it started, but based on some of the material that's in here, I can tell you with confidence that this was mostly written in 2015, the year I turned 16. I graduated high school in 1995. I graduated high school in 97, so this was my sophomore year of high school in this book. And this was number 2 of that series. I was writing a series of these. And this is almost completely just poetry. At that point in time, I was writing a ton of poetry, and I continued writing a ton of poetry well into my mid-20s, maybe even up into my late 20s. I was still writing a lot of poetry. Poetry started for me, I think, in my freshman year of high school. It might have been my sophomore year. Actually, it probably was my sophomore year. I sat in front of a girl who I had a massive crush on in one of my classes, and she was way out of my league. Just way, way, way out of my league. And for some reason, I started writing these little, romances. These little, one paragraph or one page little, just scenes, little romance scenes. And I don't know if they were necessarily sexual or if they were just kind of trying to get the girl type stuff. I'm not sure, but I wrote these things and I shared them with her, and she loved them, and she'd always ask me to write more, and so I'd write more for her. And I think that really started the journey for, I transitioned from writing those little things into writing more poetry, more poetic writing. And so this book is entirely full of poetry. This book is labeled 2006, so I was 27 at that time, and this is journaling. This is me telling my story to myself. And there are some things in here that are more poetic or more story-like that I kept in this book. But so I was going to read one of these. I was going to try to just let's go through here, find one. There's notes from people in here that I let them write, but I'm not going to read this. I'm not going to read it. Number one, this is I thought I was going to be a writer. I thought I was going to be a poet. I had a few things published, not only in my high school journal. I have the short stories and poetry in that, but I had a few tiny pieces of stuff that I've written published in the early internet days. But I never really went for it. I had always had this plan to publish, to find a collection, to make a collection. And that's what I want to talk about, because So I wrote a lot of this teen angsty kind of poetry in my days in high school, and then in the late '90s, early 2000s was kind of the golden era for something called slam poetry, which was like spoken word kind of rap, but had sort of a like take that sort of bent to it. It was more like in your face, and I wrote a lot of that. I got into that in the Marine Corps. Wrote a lot of that in the Marines. I actually went to readings and did some readings of my stuff, and people received it well. And from that, I started really keeping a catalog of my writing. At that point in time, I had stopped using these types of books, and I was using the yellow legal pads. And I don't know if I still have it. I didn't search through all my stuff, but I had at one point this collection of poems. I think there was about 20 of them where I had kept, I always did a poem in 3 drafts. So I would write a draft on a legal pad and just leave it as it is. And then I would rewrite that draft with edits on the next page of the legal pad generally. I would rewrite it, handwrite, it was all handwriting. I would handwrite the next draft with edits. So it was a scribbled mess. And then the final edit was me typing it. And so I kept that collection together in that form. I thought at that time, so this was probably 2002-ish. I was out of the Marine Corps. I was working. And I thought at that point, this was like, I guess maybe there was did MySpace exist yet? I don't know that it did. But this was before the idea of like really social sharing was a thing. I had wanted to publish that as a collection where I showed, I copied or photographed each iteration of the poem. So you could see version 1, version 2, version 3. In some cases there was a version 4. You could see the method that created these things. And in some of those pages, they were, I guess there was some artistic, like if you really took one of my edited versions where there was just scribbles and lines and doodles, like that might even be art. It might even be like an art page. And I started thinking, like, from the very beginning, besides role playing games, I mean I played a lot of role playing games as a preteen. Besides that, I don't know. My earliest memory of wanting to write was writing those little missives, those little romance missives for this girl I was crushing on. I don't know if I had tried to write poetry before that. I mean, I have stuff from when I was a kid, like I'm going to write the book about the end of the world or whatever. I wrote 5 pages and gave up on that. But that moment of writing those little half-page or one-page romances and giving them to the girl to read and getting her feedback, I really identify that as the moment when I thought, I could do this. I could be a writer of some kind. And then, so that was 95-ish, 94-ish, actually. Maybe even 93. Fast forward to 2002 or 2003, I now have 10-ish years of writing poetry under my belt. And when I say I wrote a lot of poetry, that's an understatement. Like, I had books that I would write in, and if I was somewhere where I had an idea and I didn't have a book, I wrote on napkins and I would shove them in the book. And so there used to be, and most of that stuff got lost to water damage over the years. I wrote a lot. But the early 2000s, I had already had this idea of that my artistic expression was unique enough that I wanted others to experience it. And so going through the idea of sharing one of these poems with you really brought pause to me and thought, am I just a showboat? Like, is that what this has always been about? Has it always been about being recognized for the things that I have done, or wanting to? Has it always been about external validation? Have I always, is this who I've always been? Is like, I want to write something so that you'll read it. And I want to write something so that thousands of people will read it. Not so that it sits in a journal in a tub in my basement. And I think that answer is yes. I think that answer is, other than these journals that I have, where this was for me. This stuff, I wrote it for other people. And I wanted it to be seen. And maybe that's okay. Maybe, saying I would like to make a living doing this, I think that's a fine thing to say. But I think that as an, quote, artist in that regard, I have to really take advice that I've heard that basically says you can't create art for other people. You have to create art for yourself. And I think some of this meets that. This book in particular is me working through a lot of stuff in my head that I didn't want in my head. And these journals were a lot of that. But when I've tried to write fiction and I've tried to write fantasy, it's never been that. It's always been about, I can write a book that other people will want to read. Not, I can write a book for myself. And I think that's the thing I have to figure out. How do I write something for myself? Or not necessarily, hold on. I was about to say, how do I write something for myself that other people want to read? That's the exact opposite that I need, the exact opposite mindset that I need to have. I think I need to have the mindset of write for myself. And maybe, at some point, some of the things that I write will be beneficial to others. I gotta figure that part out. And maybe I just need to stop being a showboat. I mean, I think I stopped. I'm still doing this show, but I would argue that I'm not doing this show because it brings me external validation. I'm doing this show because it makes me feel like I'm not just walking through things without thinking about them. And it puts me on the spot every day to really think about my life and how things have gone. And it's more for me than it is for anything else. I just have to figure out how to write that way. Thank you for being here as always. Thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing, being amazing friends and wonderful people. I really appreciate you. And I'll see you again tomorrow. Today's word you should know to sound smart is pedagogue. It is a noun meaning a strict, humorless, no-nonsense teacher. The negative cautions of the science are never popular. If the experimentalist would not commit himself, the social philosopher, the preacher, and the pedagogue tried the harder to give a shortcut answer. Margaret Mead, an American cultural anthropologist. Pedagogue. P-E-D-A-G-O-G-U-E. That's another one of those, like the example sentence. I think I would have to... I still don't understand it. I just read it a second time. I still don't understand it. It doesn't really make sense. It tries to.